The best gift you can give us this Christmas is to disappear. Vanessa said it with my own suitcase in her hand, packed with my own clothes, standing in my own hallway, while my son stood behind her and nodded. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. 44 years I raised that boy, and $62,700 of my savings I had poured into keeping his family afloat, and they handed me a suitcase on Christmas Eve. But I took it, and I smiled, because there was one thing my daughter-in-law didn't know about the house she was so desperate to sell. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitfield, and I am 71 years old. For 34 years, I was the payroll supervisor at Hollis Textile Mills here in Raleigh, North Carolina, which means I spent my entire working life making sure numbers told the truth. Every Friday, 800 paychecks went out of my office, and in 34 years, not one of them was wrong. I read every document that crossed my desk, every line, every footnote. My husband Raymond used to laugh at me for reading the terms and conditions on a toaster warranty. "Ellie," he'd say, "nobody on God's green earth reads page 4. I always read page 4. Remember that. It matters later." Raymond and I bought the house on Cardinal Lane in the spring of 1981 for $58,500, which felt like all the money in the world back then. He was a machinist at Carolina Precision Tool, and his hands were never quite clean of metal dust. And I loved those hands for 47 years. We made the last mortgage payment in November of 1997, and that night he brought home a bottle of sparkling cider because neither of us drank, and we toasted in the kitchen like we'd won the lottery. In a way, we had. We raised our son Daniel in that house. I painted his height on the pantry door frame every birthday until he was 16 and too cool for it. I sewed prom dresses for the neighborhood girls at that kitchen table to pay for his college textbooks. When Raymond died of a heart attack in the garden on October 14th, 2022, 3 weeks after our 47th anniversary, he died 6 feet from the rose bushes he planted the year Daniel was born. So when I tell you what that house means to me, understand, it is not real estate. It is the ledger of my whole life. Daniel and his wife Vanessa moved in with me in June of 2024 after Daniel lost his logistics job. $91,000 a year, gone in a Tuesday morning meeting that lasted 11 minutes. He called me from the parking lot and his voice cracked, and I heard the 8-year-old boy who once brought me a bird with a broken wing. "Just for a few months, Mom. Just until I get back on my feet." "Of course," I said. Of course. What else does a mother say? They came with a moving truck. My son, Vanessa, and my granddaughter Maya, who was 14 then and the only one of the 3 who hugged me at the door. I want to be fair, because fairness is a habit I refuse to lose. In the beginning, it was almost nice. The house had been so quiet since Raymond passed that I'd taken to leaving the radio on in empty rooms. Now there were footsteps again. Maya did her homework at my kitchen table, and I taught her to make Raymond's favorite peach cobbler, and those Sunday afternoons were worth more to me than anything with a dollar sign on it. But I am a bookkeeper down to my bones, so let me give you the other column too. I paid $500 a month toward groceries and utilities the entire time they lived under my roof. 18 months, $9,000, because Vanessa said things were tight and I didn't want my granddaughter eating store-brand cereal if it embarrassed her. In March of 2023, before they even moved in, I had wired Daniel $28,000 to clear the credit card debt that was, in his words, crushing them. In the fall of 2024, I paid $9,400 for Vanessa's dental implants because she cried at my kitchen table about being ashamed to smile in photographs, and I am the kind of woman who cannot watch another woman cry about her own face. I paid $4,000 for Maya's braces, and that one I'd pay again twice over. And every year, without a word from either of them, I paid the $6,150 in property taxes and homeowner's insurance, the way I had since 1981. I kept it all in a green ledger in my desk drawer, not out of spite, but out of habit. Numbers are how I pray. $62,700. Food, debts, teeth, whims, all of it given freely. None of it counted. The pattern started small, the way rot always does. It was February of this year when I first noticed my mail looking wrong. I have received my bank statements on the second Tuesday of every month since Jimmy Carter was president, and suddenly they were arriving opened and resealed, or a day late, or not at all. Vanessa said the mail carrier was new and useless. I nodded and said nothing, but I noticed. Then came the small disappearances. Raymond's socket wrench set vanished from the garage in late February, a Craftsman set he'd kept oiled for 30 years. And when I asked, Vanessa said Daniel had lent it to a friend. The friend, I later learned from Ruth, was Facebook Marketplace, where it sold for $85. Then my mother's soup tureen was suddenly, in storage. Eleanor, we're decluttering. You'll thank me. Then the framed photograph of Raymond and me at Myrtle Beach in 1988 came down off the hallway wall, and a mirror went up in its place. And when I asked where the photograph had gone, Vanessa smiled and said, "Buyers need to picture themselves in a space." Then she caught herself. Guests. Guests need to. I said nothing. Into the ledger it went. And there was one more thread in the pattern, the one that frightened me more than the money. And I want you to listen closely, because this is the one they run on women like us. Vanessa began narrating my mind, out loud, to other people. Eleanor left the stove on again. I had not. She got confused at the pharmacy Tuesday. Bless her heart. I had corrected the pharmacist, who had my dosage wrong, which is a different thing entirely. "We worry about her memory," she told my own neighbor at the mailboxes, her hand on her chest like a woman in a commercial for worry. She was building a file of her own, you see. A story where the old woman was fading, where whatever came next, the papers, the facility, the sale, would look like kindness. When they cannot take what's yours by asking, they will try to take who you are first, because a woman who can't be trusted with her own mind can't be trusted with her own signature. I understood the game the third time I heard it. I had processed disability paperwork for 34 years. I know what a case being built smells like. Then it was the way Vanessa began talking about the house. Not to me. Around me. "This kitchen is honestly a gut job," she said to her sister Dana on speakerphone while I stood 10 feet away washing the dishes in that very kitchen. "The bones are good, though. Great school district. You'd be shocked what these old ranches are going for now. You'd be shocked." I dried my hands slowly and thought, shocked by what? Exactly? Vanessa? Who is being shocked, and by whom? In March, she brought me a stack of papers at breakfast. Insurance renewal, Eleanor. Just needs your signature. It's all standard. She set a pen beside my coffee like a nurse setting out medication. Now, I told you about page 4. I always read page 4. So I read that stack the way I read everything, slowly, with my good glasses, while Vanessa's fingernails clicked on the counter like a clock that wanted me dead. Pages 1 through 3 were exactly what she said. Homeowner's insurance, renewal terms, premium schedule. Page 4 was a quitclaim deed. A North Carolina quitclaim deed, filled out neat as a hymnal, transferring the property at 412 Cardinal Lane from Eleanor Grace Whitfield to Daniel Raymond Whitfield. My hands did not shake. I want you to know that. 34 years of payroll teaches you that your face is a document too, and you decide what gets printed on it. I looked at that page for what I made sure was the length of a normal glance. And in those few seconds, standing in the kitchen where I had toasted a paid-off mortgage with sparkling cider, I understood 3 things all at once. My daughter-in-law was trying to steal my house. My son either knew or had chosen not to know, which in my ledger is the same entry. And neither one of them had the faintest idea who they were dealing with. Because here is what Vanessa did not know, what she could not have known, because she never once in 18 months asked me a single question about my life. In 2011, after Raymond's first heart scare, he and I sat in the office of an attorney named Harold Weiss, an old friend from Raymond's bowling league, and we did what careful people do. We placed the house, and everything else, into the Whitfield family revocable trust. The deed to 412 Cardinal Lane had not been in my personal name for 14 years. It belonged to the trust. And since Raymond's death, the sole trustee of that trust, the only living human being on this earth with the legal power to sell that house, was a 71-year-old woman standing at her kitchen counter in a bathrobe, being handed a pen by a fool. A quitclaim deed signed by Eleanor Whitfield, the private citizen, would transfer exactly what Eleanor Whitfield privately owned, which was nothing. It would be a deed to smoke, a signature on wind. So I made a decision at that kitchen counter between one sip of coffee and the next, and I will not pretend it was agonizing, because it wasn't. It was as clean and cold as a January morning. I picked up the pen. Raymond's pen, the silver one from his retirement, which she'd had the gall to set out for me, and I signed page 4 in my best Sunday handwriting. "There," I said, "all standard." Vanessa smiled at me with those $9,400 teeth. "Thank you, Eleanor. You're so easy. I'm so easy. I have thought about those 3 words every day since." She gathered the papers like a girl gathering flowers and practically floated out of my kitchen. And I sat there with my coffee going cold, and I let myself feel it, once, fully, so I would never have to feel it again by surprise. My son's wife had just tried to rob me at my own breakfast table. And somewhere upstairs, my son was letting her. The words that came to me were not angry ones. They were Raymond's, from 40 years of watching him work metal on a lathe. "Measure twice," he used to say. "Cut once." I had just finished measuring. Let me tell you what a woman like me does after a morning like that. She does not confront. She does not weep into the phone to her friends. She does not, God forbid, post about it on the internet. She takes out a fresh page in her green ledger, writes the date at the top, March 11th, and begins keeping records. Because the difference between a victim and a witness is documentation, and I had spent 34 years becoming the best witness in Wake County. That first week, I watched. Vanessa drove off with those papers on a Thursday morning, wearing her interview blazer, and when she came home, she was humming. I checked the Wake County Register of Deeds website that night on the computer in my sewing room. Yes, I know how to use a computer. Underestimating old women is a national pastime, and I have never once minded, because it is so very useful. And there it was, recorded April 2nd. A quitclaim deed, book and page number and all, purporting to make my son the owner of my home. Filed. Stamped. Official looking as a tax return and worth less than the paper it stained. Lawyers have a phrase for a deed like that. I would learn soon enough. A wild deed. A deed from someone who owned nothing, conveying nothing, hanging in the county records like a ghost. I printed the page. I dated it. Into the ledger it went. The decision to act had already been made, you understand, at the kitchen counter with Raymond's pen in my hand. But a decision is not a plan, and I needed one, and I knew better than to build it alone. So on a rainy Tuesday in April, I told Vanessa I had a doctor's appointment. She didn't ask what kind. She never asked me a question that didn't have money at the end of it. And I drove downtown to a narrow brick office on Fayetteville Street with a brass plaque that said Harold M. Weiss, attorney at law. He was 76 by then and mostly retired, but he kept the office, he said, because his wife wouldn't let him practice law in the sunroom. Harold had been at Raymond's funeral. He was a small, tidy man with white eyebrows like snowdrifts, and when his secretary showed me in, he stood up and took both my hands the way people of our generation do and said, "Eleanor Whitfield, 15 years I've been waiting for you to come check on that trust, and you picked the worst rain of the spring." "Harold," I said, "I need you to look something up, and I need you to not react until I've finished talking." I laid it all out on his desk in the order I'd written it. The stack of insurance papers. My photograph of page 4, because yes, I had photographed it with my phone while Vanessa's back was turned. You don't survive 3 decades of payroll audits without learning to keep copies. The printout from the Register of Deeds. The green ledger, open to the page, marked Daniel and Vanessa, with every dollar since 2023 entered in blue ink. $28,000, $9,400, $9,000, $4,000, the taxes. The insurance, the column at the bottom, $62,700. Harold read for a long time. When he finally looked up, his face had gone through anger and come out the other side into something quieter and more useful. "You know the deed is void," he said. It wasn't a question. The trust holds title, has since 2011. She had you sign away an interest you don't personally hold. It's a nullity. "I know," I said. I read page 4, and then Harold Weiss did something I will treasure until the day I die. He laughed. He put his hand flat on his desk and laughed until his snowdrift eyebrows shook, and then he wiped his eyes and said, "Raymond used to tell us at the bowling alley, 'My Ellie reads everything. The bank is scared of her.' 20 years I thought he was joking." He straightened his tie. "All right. She recorded it, which was ambitious of her. That's not just greedy, Eleanor. Recording a fraudulent instrument. That has criminal shadows on it. So before we do anything, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it as the trustee, not as the mother." He folded his hands. "What do you want?" I had thought about this in the car, in the rain, at every red light. "I want to know how far they'll take it," I said. I want it documented so thoroughly that no one, not a judge, not a neighbor, not my son himself, can ever say I misunderstood. And when the moment comes, Harold, I want to be the one who chooses it, not her." He nodded slowly, the way men nod when they realize the general in the room isn't them. "Then we let the line play out," he said. "We watch, we paper the file, and we do not touch that recorded deed yet, because right now it's a trap she built and moved into herself. The moment anyone tries to sell or borrow against that house, a title search will hit the trust like a brick wall." She's not walking toward a payday, Eleanor. She's walking toward a cliff, and she's holding your son's hand while she does it. That last part sat in my chest all the way home, because that was the arithmetic I hadn't wanted to do. Whatever came for Vanessa was going to come for Daniel too, and some tired old muscle in my heart still wanted to jump in front of it. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I went inside. I looked at Raymond's rose bushes, bare and pruned and patient, waiting out the cold like they did every year. Then I looked up at the window of what used to be Daniel's boyhood room, where he now slept beside a woman who had handed his mother a pen. He nodded along. I reminded myself. You saw him nod. I went inside and made pot roast, and at dinner, Vanessa complimented my cooking twice, which by then I understood was the sound a trap makes while it's being baited. The plan, once Harold and I built it, had 3 parts, and I want to walk you through them the way I'd walk a new payroll girl through her first audit, because the details are where the dignity lives. First, I secured the paper. Over the next 3 weeks, in trips no longer than an hour, so no one would wonder, I moved every original document that mattered out of that house. The trust instrument, the deed history, Raymond's life insurance records, my marriage certificate, my will, 40 years of tax returns, and the small velvet box with my mother's wedding ring, which I had once caught Vanessa trying on in my bedroom mirror while she thought I was at church. All of it went into safe deposit box 447 at First Carolina Bank, a bank, please note, where neither my son nor his wife had ever set foot. I opened a new checking account there the same day and rerouted my Social Security and my pension deposits into it, effective June 1st. The old joint conveniences, the household account Daniel had helped me set up with his name on it for emergencies. I let it sit with $214 in it, like a bird feeder. If anyone was watching my money, and I had come to believe someone was, they would see nothing but a quiet old woman's quiet old habits. Second, I documented the living. North Carolina, Harold reminded me, is a one-party consent state, which means I may lawfully record a conversation I am part of. So when Vanessa sat me down in July with brochures, glossy ones, Brookdale Senior Living, just to look at, Eleanor, just options, you rattle around this big house all alone. I let my phone sit face down on the arm of my chair, recording, while I asked innocent questions in my most doddering voice. And who would pay for a place like that, dear? It says here $4,200 a month. And Vanessa, God bless her confidence, patted my knee and said the words I will never forget. Don't you worry about the money. The house is going to take care of everything. That's what houses are for. The house is going to take care of everything. Into the file it went, dated July 19th. Third and hardest, I performed. For 8 months, I played the part Vanessa had written for me, the sweet, softening, slightly forgetful old dear. I let her catch me misplacing my reading glasses. I asked her to repeat things I'd heard perfectly. I laughed at Daniel's jokes and knitted through their television programs and said, isn't that nice to things that were not nice at all? You may ask how I bore it, smiling across the gravy boat at people who were measuring my coffin fit for a sale sign. I'll tell you honestly, some nights I didn't bear it well. Some nights I sat on the edge of my bed with Raymond's photograph and asked him how our boy, who cried over a bird with a broken wing, had become a man who nods. The photograph never answered. But every morning I got up, and I fixed my hair, and I balanced my face like a ledger, because I had learned something in that long performance that I want every woman listening to me to write down somewhere. Being underestimated is not an insult. It is a gift. It is the only weapon they hand you themselves. 2 moments from those performing months I have to give you, because they kept me human when the part threatened to swallow me. The first was Maya. It was an August evening, and she found me in the sewing room and closed the door behind her, which she had never done, and stood there twisting the hem of her shirt. "Grandma," she said, "is something going on with the house?" Mom keeps FaceTiming Aunt Dana with the door shut, and I heard her say once it closes. Once what closes? And I looked at that 15-year-old girl, the only person in that family who had thought to ask me a question in a year and a half, and I made a decision I stand by. I did not lie to her, and I did not arm her. Grown folks are making some plans they haven't finished making, I said. And your grandma is making some of her own. And whatever happens, sweetheart, you will always, always have a place with me. That's the only part you need to carry. She studied me for a long moment with Raymond's exact brown eyes, and then she said, "You're smarter than all of them, you know," and went back to her phone like teenagers do. 15 years old, and the only accurate auditor in the house. The second was Daniel, and this one cost me. A Sunday in September, Vanessa at her sister's, and my son wandered into the kitchen while I shelled butter beans and just stood there. Leaned on the counter like he used to at 16. "You ever think about downsizing, Mom?" he said, too casual, not meeting my eyes. Somewhere easier, no stairs. And for one held breath, I thought he might do it. Might sit down across from me and put the whole rotten thing on the table between us and be my son again. I gave him the door. I said, "Is there something you want to tell me, Daniel?" And I watched him stand in that open door for 3 full seconds, and I watched him close it. "No," he said. "Just thinking about you is all." He took a beer out to the garage. I shelled the rest of the beans alone, and that night I wrote one line in the ledger, in the notes column where I usually record check numbers. He had his chance. Given freely. Declined. You see, that's the entry I needed. Not for a lawyer. For me. So that when the moment came, no soft old corner of my heart could rise up and say you never gave him a way out. I gave him a door, wide open, on a Sunday afternoon over butter beans. He chose the garage. The silver Lexus appeared for the first time on a Tuesday in September. I was deadheading Raymond's roses when it pulled up, and a woman climbed out in heels the color of raspberry sherbet, all teeth and clipboard, and Vanessa met her at the door like they were sorority sisters. "Eleanor!" Vanessa sang across the yard. "This is Brittany. She's an old friend. She's just going to look at some decorating ideas with me." Brittany Cole, the car's door magnet said. Meridian Realty. Decorating ideas. I waved my pruning shears pleasantly and went back to my roses, and through the open windows of my own home, I listened to a real estate agent walk my hallways calling out square footage. Primary bedroom, 14 by 16. Original hardwoods under this carpet. Buyers go crazy for that. Now this room. My sewing room, Raymond's mother's singer machine, the wall of quilts. This is clutter, honestly. This all reads as clutter. Clear it and it's a home office. Clutter. 60 years of a woman's hands, and it reads as clutter. I noted the date, September 16th. Then the measuring came. Brittany again in October with a laser gadget and a photographer whose lens cap I found later in my fern. Then boxes appeared in the garage, flat packed, labeled in Vanessa's loopy hand. Donnet. Estate sale. E's room. My room reduced to an initial. Then, the last week of October, Ruth Delgado came across the street with a casserole dish she didn't need to return and stood in my kitchen with her ER nurse face on, the one that delivers hard news at a steady pulse. Ruth has lived across Cardinal Lane from me for 38 years. She held wakes with me, hurricanes with me, held my hand at Raymond's graveside. "Eleanor," she said, low, "my daughter sends me those real estate listings for fun. Zillow." She put her phone on my counter. "Honey, your house went up last night." There it was. My roses in the thumbnail photo, blooming their hearts out for a crime. 412 Cardinal Lane, $624,900. Charming updated ranch in sought-after school district. Listed by Brittany Cole, Meridian Realty. Seller, D. Whitfield. "I know," I told Ruth. And then, because 38 years earns the truth, I sat her down with coffee and told her all of it. The deed, the trust, Harold, the ledger, all 8 months of it. Ruth listened the way nurses listen, without gasping, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said the finest thing anyone said to me that entire year, Eleanor Whitfield. All this time, they thought they were living with a sheep. She raised her coffee cup. They moved in with a wolf who knits. The offer came in the second week of November. I know, because I heard it happen. I had become invisible in my own home by then, which, as I've told you, has its uses. And I was in the pantry counting canned goods when Vanessa took the call from Brittany 4 feet away in the kitchen, on speaker. Because Vanessa did everything on speaker. Her whole life performed for an audience of no one. Full ask -7, $618,000, honey. Conventional financing. They want to close January 15th. And Vanessa made a sound I had never heard from her before, a kind of squeal with money in it, and called for Daniel, and my son came in from the garage, and I stood in the dark of my pantry among the green beans and listened to my child celebrate the sale of his mother's house. "Charlotte, baby," Vanessa kept saying. "The townhouse. I already talked to Dana. We can be in by February." And Daniel. I want to be precise here, because precision is all I have left of him from that day. Daniel said, "What about Mom?" 4 seconds of silence. I counted them. "What about her?" Vanessa said. "Danny, we've been over this. She's 71. This house is too much for her. The stairs to that basement are a lawsuit waiting to happen. And honestly, I'm done. I have been carrying that woman for a year and a half, and I am done. She's a burden, baby. She's a sweet old burden, and your cousin Lorraine has that room in Fayetteville, and after the closing, there'll be plenty for Brookdale if Lorraine gets sick of her. Everybody wins. I have been carrying that woman. 18 months of my $500 checks, my $28,000, her teeth in her head, bought and paid for. She had been carrying me. And my son, my Daniel, the boy whose height still climbs the pantry door frame in pencil, not 3 feet from where I stood. My son said nothing. I heard him exhale. I heard the refrigerator open. I heard a bottle cap. And then I heard him say, "Yeah, okay, you're right. It's just, yeah, you're right." 2 yeah, you're rights. That was the price of me. I stood in that pantry until my knees ached, and I'm not ashamed to tell you there were tears on my face in the dark, the only ones I permitted myself that whole autumn. Not for the house, for the 4 seconds. He had hesitated 4 seconds, and then he had nodded along, and some part of my heart that had been holding out for him quietly closed its account. But here is the part I need you to sit with, the way I had to. As I stood there, hidden in my own pantry, wiping my face with a dish towel that I had hemmed by hand in 1989, I realized they had scheduled a closing, January 15th, which meant a title search was coming, which meant the cliff Harold promised me was now on the calendar, and my son was walking toward it whistling. If you're still with me in this story, and I can feel that you are, do me one small kindness before I open that pantry door. Subscribe and stay with me, because women like me spent our whole lives being talked over, and every one of you who joins me here is a voice saying not anymore. Give the video a like if your heart is pounding the way mine was in that dark pantry. Now, let me tell you what a bookkeeper does when she knows the exact date the world ends. She prepares the final statement. The Monday after Thanksgiving. A Thanksgiving, I'll add, where Vanessa photographed my table settings for inspiration, and Daniel carved Raymond's turkey with Raymond's knife and never once met my eyes. I went back to Harold's office, and we spent 3 hours building what he called, with a little bow, the Whitfield file. A certified copy of the trust instrument with the 2011 recording of the deed into the trust, book, and page. A title abstract showing the unbroken chain, Raymond and Eleanor Whitfield to the Whitfield Family Revocable Trust, Eleanor G. Whitfield, sole trustee. The fraudulent quitclaim, flagged and annotated. My photographs. My recordings, transcribed by Harold's secretary. Every the house is going to take care of everything in cold black type. The ledger, photocopied, totaled $62,700. And 2 new documents with my signature on them, witnessed and notarized. A restated will and trust amendment, removing Vanessa from anything she had ever been named in, and placing what would have been Daniel's inheritance into a protected trust for Maya, for her education, her first home, her life, with Harold as trustee, untouchable by her parents until she turned 25. And the last piece, Harold said, sliding a single page across the desk. A 30-day notice terminating their occupancy of 412 Cardinal Lane, addressed to Daniel Raymond Whitfield and Vanessa Whitfield, guests of the property owner. Dated, signed, and undelivered. You say when, Eleanor. Not me, not them. You. I put it in my handbag like a woman accepting her own heartbeat back. "One more thing," Harold said as I stood to leave, and his voice had the careful weight of an old man choosing his words. The closing attorney will run title in December sometime. When that search comes back, the sale detonates on its own. That part needs nothing from us. But Eleanor, the recorded deed, the listing, the contract they signed as owners. A district attorney could read that file and see felony fraud. Your son's signature is on that listing agreement. He looked at me over his glasses. You'll have a choice to make about how hard this lands. You don't have to make it today, but it's coming, and you should decide it before they know anything's wrong. Decisions made angry are expensive. I drove home the long way, past the mill where I'd worked, past the church where I married Raymond in 1975, and I made the decision at a stoplight on Six Forks Road, watching a young mother wrangle 2 children across the crosswalk. I would not send my granddaughter's father to prison. Not because he'd earned mercy. He had earned nothing, but because Maya had, and because Raymond's boy was going to be taught, not destroyed. Justice, my own mother used to say, is a lesson. Vengeance is just noise. But teaching, I decided at that stoplight, would require a classroom. And they were about to build me one, with a bow on it, on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve on Cardinal Lane has looked the same for 40 years. Luminaries down the sidewalks, Ruth's grandchildren shrieking in the dusk, the Hendersons' inflatable snowman leaning like a drunk uncle. Inside my house, I had done what I always do. Raymond's mother's nativity on the mantel. Ham in the oven since 2 o'clock. Maya and I had made the peach cobbler that morning, and she'd hugged me with flour on her hands and whispered, "Grandma, you're my favorite person." And I had held on to that sentence all day like a handrail, because I knew what day it was, even if no one else did. The closing was 3 weeks out. The boxes in the garage had multiplied. Something was coming. I could read it in Vanessa's lightness, the way you can smell snow. It came at 8:40 in the evening, after the ham, after the cobbler, after Maya had gone up to call her friends. I was in my chair with my knitting when Vanessa walked into the living room carrying my suitcase. The blue hard-shell one Raymond bought me for our 30th anniversary trip to Charleston. Packed. I could tell by the way she carried it. Packed by her hands, my clothes folded by the woman who called me a burden, and Daniel came and stood behind her in the doorway with his eyes aimed somewhere over my head. "Eleanor," Vanessa said, in the bright counterfeit voice she used on waiters and old women. "We love you. You know we love you." But this arrangement has run its course, and Danny and I have made some decisions about the house, and Lorraine has a beautiful room waiting for you in Fayetteville, and honestly, with everything this family has been through this year, she set the suitcase down at my feet like a period at the end of my life. The best gift you can give us this Christmas is to disappear. And there we are, right back where I started with you. The ice water. The suitcase. My son, nodding. Actually nodding, 3 little bobs of the head, agreeing to his mother's erasure on Christmas Eve in the house where I taught him to walk. I looked at the suitcase for a long moment. Then I looked up at Vanessa, and I smiled, and I watched the smile confuse her, a flicker of static across all that certainty. "You know," I said, setting down my knitting, "you're right. I'm right. This arrangement has run its course." I stood, smoothed my skirt, and picked up the suitcase. And oh, it was light. She hadn't even packed it full. She couldn't even steal my life thoroughly. "I'll go tonight, but I won't be driving to Fayetteville in the dark at my age. I'll stay at Ruth's across the street, and then after Christmas, say the 27th. I'd like us all to sit down here, at the house, 10 o'clock in the morning. There are some family papers to go over before any big changes. Practical things. Boring things." I patted her arm, and I felt her flinch, and I have replayed that flinch many times since with something I can only call satisfaction. "You'll want to be here for it, dear. Both of you." "Mom," Daniel said, 1 syllable, the first he'd contributed to my exile. "Merry Christmas, Daniel," I said, and I walked out of my own front door with my blue suitcase, down the luminary-lit walk, across Cardinal Lane, and Ruth opened her door before I could knock. She'd been watching from the window, 38 years of watching my house from that window, and she took the suitcase from my hand and said, "Wolf, who knits, get in here. I have wine, and you're finally going to have some." I slept that night in Ruth's guest room, and here is the strange truth. I slept like a stone. The waiting was over. The date was set. And 2 streets of Christmas lights away, my daughter-in-law was toasting a closing that was already dead. She just hadn't received the death certificate yet. It arrived on December 26th at 2:15 in the afternoon. I know the time because Ruth and I were playing gin rummy when my phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring. It rang again. I let it ring. The third time, I answered and said nothing at all, and my son's voice came through high and thin, a boy's voice, the bird with the broken wing voice. Mom, something's wrong with the sale. The attorney's office called Brittany, the title search. They're saying the house. Mom, they're saying we don't own the house. They're saying it belongs to some trust. Vanessa's on the phone screaming at the title company. She's saying it's a mistake. Tell them it's a mistake. Mom, a breath. What's the Whitfield Family Trust? 10 o'clock tomorrow. Daniel, I said. Like I told you. Bring your wife. And I hung up. Just like that. It is a remarkable thing. Hanging up when you've spent a lifetime being the one hung up on. They were already at the house when Harold and I arrived at 9:55 the next morning. I'd given Harold a key. It was, after all, mine to give. Vanessa had put herself in Raymond's wingback chair, arms crossed, jaw set, dressed for a fight. Daniel stood at the window looking gray. Maya, thank God, was at a friend's. I sat down at my own dining table, laid the file folders out in a neat row the way I'd laid out payroll every Friday for 34 years, and folded my hands. In March of 2011, I began. Raymond and I placed this house into the Whitfield Family Revocable Trust. I slid the first folder across the table. Certified copy of the recorded deed. This house has not been in my personal name for almost 15 years. Since your father died, Daniel, I am the sole trustee. I am the only person alive who can sell it, which means that the quitclaim deed your wife hid on page 4 of an insurance renewal on March 11th of this year. I slid the second folder. And recorded at the county on April 2nd, transferred nothing. It is a legal nullity. What it is instead, Harold tells me, is rather good evidence. Vanessa's face performed, in the space of 5 seconds, an entire theater season. Shock. Calculation. And then, because a certain kind of person, cornered, always chooses attack, fury. You signed it, she said, coming up out of Raymond's chair. You sat right in that kitchen and you signed it. You knew. You manipulative old woman. You let us list this house. You let us go under contract. Do you have any idea what you've? Sit down, Vanessa, I said, and I did not raise my voice because I have never needed to. Yes, I signed it. With my husband's pen. I signed a worthless paper you prepared to steal my home, and then I watched, for 9 months, to see exactly how far you would take it. You took it to a listing agreement, to a purchase contract, to brochures for a facility you planned to pay for with the proceeds of fraud, to a packed suitcase on Christmas Eve. I slid the third folder. It's all in here. The recordings. I was a party to those conversations, dear, perfectly legal in this state. The photographs, the transcript where you say, and I'm quoting you, the house is going to take care of everything. And a ledger of every dollar I have given this family since 2023. $62,700. You called me a burden, Vanessa. I heard you say it from the pantry while you carried me all the way to the bank. Daniel, Vanessa said, wheeling. Say something. She trapped us. She sat there like a sweet little. She trapped us. This is entrapment. We'll sue. Tell her. But Daniel wasn't looking at her. Daniel was looking at the folder with the quitclaim deed in it, and I watched my son's face do something Vanessa's never could. It broke, honestly. Page 4, he said quietly. You told me she signed the house over to us. You told me she wanted to. You said Mom sat down with you and said we should have it. He looked up at his wife. There was no conversation. You slipped it into the insurance papers. You had my mother sign a. He stopped. His hand went over his mouth. And my son, 44 years old, sat down slowly on the piano bench like his strings had been cut and said through his fingers, "The listing has my name on it." Oh, God. The contract has my name on it. Yes, Harold said, speaking for the first time, gentle as a scalpel. It does. You could hear the mantel clock. Raymond wound that clock every Sunday of his life, and I have wound it every Sunday since, and it ticked into that silence like a verdict. Here is what happens now, I said. The sale is dead. The title company killed it yesterday, and no one can revive it. Harold has prepared a filing to strike your fraudulent deed from the record. What I have not yet decided to prepare, I let that sit, is a criminal referral, recording a false instrument, attempted fraud. Harold assures me the file is, in his word, tidy. Vanessa had gone the color of oatmeal. I am not going to do that. Not for your sake, for Maya's, because that girl will not visit her parents through glass on account of your greed and his cowardice. But mercy has terms, and here they are. I slid the last folder. 30 days notice. You will be out of this house by January 31st. You will sign an acknowledgement Harold has drafted, admitting the deed was procured without my knowledge. Sign it, and the file stays in his safe forever. And Daniel, my son raised his eyes to me, and I made myself hold them. The $28,000 was a gift when I believed I had a son. I'm told I may still have one. He can prove it at $250 a month, not because I need the money, but because a man pays his debts, and your father would want me to leave you the chance to be one. Vanessa laughed then, one ugly, cornered bark of a laugh, and said, "This is insane. Danny, get up. We're calling a lawyer." She's clearly not competent. Look at her. We'll say she's not competent. We had concerns. That's why the brochures. And she was still building it, still constructing the next lie right there in front of the wreckage of the last one, when Daniel said, "Stop. Just that. Stop. Quiet." But it was the first wall he had ever put in front of that woman, and she hit it like a bird hitting glass. She was in the pantry. Vanessa! His voice cracked down the middle. On Thanksgiving, I couldn't even look at her. You want to tell a judge she's not competent? She ran a 9-month operation on us, and we never saw it. She's the most competent person in this room. He turned to me, and his face was wet, and he was ugly with crying the way real crying is ugly, and he said, "Mom." When she handed you that suitcase, I nodded. I stood in that doorway, and I nodded, and you looked at me, and you smiled, and I have been sick about that smile for 3 days because I couldn't figure out what it meant. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand like a little boy. Dad would be ashamed of me. Say it. You'd be within your rights. I looked at my son for a long moment. Warm in memory, I have told you. Cold in betrayal. This was both at once, and I chose my words the way Raymond chose his cuts. Your father, I said, would be ashamed of what you did. He'd be waiting to see what you do next. So am I. They were out by January 26th, 5 days early, which I'm told is the only deadline Vanessa ever beat in her life. She went to her sister, Dana's in Charlotte. Daniel did not go with her. He took a 1-bedroom apartment off Capitol Boulevard and a warehouse supervisor job at 2/3 his old salary, and on the 1st of February, an envelope came to my mailbox. Delivered on time. Funny how the mail service healed itself once Vanessa left, with a check for $250 and a note in my son's terrible handwriting. Payment 1 of $112. I did the math. Sundays too, if you'll have me. He comes now. Most Sundays. We are careful with each other, the way you're careful with a mended cup. Some things hold. We're finding out which. The night after the reveal, I walked back across Cardinal Lane to Ruth's. I stayed with her through New Year's. I wanted the house empty of them before I filled it with me again. And we sat up past midnight with the good sherry her son sends from Spain, and Ruth asked me the question you may be asking too. "Do you feel better?" she said. "Now that they know?" And I thought about it honestly, because Ruth has earned honest. Better isn't the word, I told her. I feel accurate. For 18 months, I was a line item in someone else's fraud, and tonight the books balance again. That's not joy, Ruth, but it will hold weight. Joy comes later, if it comes. She considered that and topped up my glass and said, "Payroll to the very end." And we laughed the way you can only laugh with someone who held your hand at a graveside. And joy did come, in its own unhurried way, the way spring comes to a pruned rose. It came in February, standing in my emptied house. They took surprisingly little. Thieves rarely want the things with love in them. When I hung Raymond and me at Myrtle Beach back on the hallway wall, dead center, where the mirror had been. It came in March, when Harold called to say every filing was complete, and then stayed on the line 20 minutes just to argue with me about Raymond's old bowling scores. It came on Thursdays, which are Ruth's night now, gin, rummy, and no mercy. The acknowledgement sits signed in Harold's safe. The wild deed is stricken from the record, and the county register, Harold says, now uses it to train new clerks on what fraud looks like. Vanessa filed for divorce in March, citing irreconcilable differences, which is the truest document she ever produced. Maya stays with me most weekends. Her trust is funded and waiting for her 25th birthday, though she doesn't know it yet. And this spring, she helped me plant 2 new rose bushes beside her grandfather's. And when she asked what kind they were, I told her the tag said Quiet Fire, and she said, "Grandma, that's so you." And I laughed until I had to sit down on the garden bench. I still live at 412 Cardinal Lane. I may sell it someday, but it will be my hand on that pen, my price, my moment, the way it was always going to be. In the evenings, I sit where Vanessa once perched to tell an agent my life read as clutter, and I wind Raymond's clock, and I think about what I'd want to say to you if you've carried something like this too. It is this. They will mistake your patience for weakness and your kindness for a resource. Let them. Keep your records. Read page 4. And when they finally hand you the suitcase, look them in the eye and smile. Because a woman who knows exactly what she owns, and exactly what she's owed, and exactly who she is, does not need to raise her voice. She only needs to choose her moment. I chose mine on a Christmas Eve, with luminaries burning down a street I've loved for 45 years, and I have not lost a night's sleep since. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.